Hi, this is Evan Albert, and this is my presentation on why genetically modified organisms in foods should be labeled. As you can see, the top 10 most common genetically modified foods are corn, soy, cottonseed, papaya, rice, canola, potatoes, tomatoes, dairy products, and peas. Because many processed foods include either high fructose corn syrup or soy protein, many of the items found in our grocery stores most likely contain some kind of genetically modified ingredient. The first McGregor brand tomato was voluntarily labeled and branded with the term flavor saver because it was genetically modified to stay firm longer. In this case, voluntary labeling was actually a benefit to the company. This graph shows the increased use of genetically modified crops from 1996 to 2013. The HT in front of soybeans, cotton, and corn stands for the herbicide tolerance, while the BT stands for Bacillus thuringiensis, which is an insecticide. Both of these help crops become more resilient and therefore increases crop yield and profit. As you can see from this slide, the current FDA stance is quite vague. One example of when labeling would be necessary is if an unexpected allergen were present in a genetically modified crop, such as a corn allergen in a soy product. Shown in the photo is McGregor's voluntarily labeled Flavor Saver tomato. Because their genetically modified crop contained an advantage to organic tomatoes, they chose to label it. Mandatory labeling would allow consumers to make more informed decisions. In addition, mandatory labeling can help to offset the costs associated with labeling because the government could subsidize it. Therefore, the economic advantage of genetically modified crops would stay intact. Similar to the calorie and nutritional content that is mandatory on food products, I believe that the use of genetically modified crops should be disclosed as well. According to the National Research Council, a majority of the United States feels that this information should be disclosed on packaging. The biggest con to labeling comes from the economic standpoint. Many companies do not want mandatory labeling due to costs and the thought that consumers will steer away from genetically modified foods. In other countries, it has been seen that mandatory labeling actually limits choices because the big retailers choose not to even carry these genetically modified crops due to perceived consumer mindset. If this is really the case, the need for mandatory labeling is even more important as it allows consumers to vote with their wallets while allowing large corporations to adapt to what consumers want. In the graph pictured, the expected market share is shown between genetically modified crops and non-genetically modified crops, with the isoprofit line in bold black. The situations posed on this slide would become more complex in regards to mandatory labeling. In my opinion, the threshold for labeling should be an all-or-nothing mindset, which means that all of these scenarios should carry mandatory labels. Around the world, more than 50 countries have required mandatory labeling. I think that the United States and Canada should follow suit. The key going forward is going to be educating the public on exactly what genetically modified crops are to allow them to make informed decisions. Having mandatory labeling in the United States would be a great first step towards a general education of our public in regards to exactly what goes into developing, testing, and producing these genetically modified crops.